Hello and welcome to this webinar about your workplace rights. This webinar will help you to know what to look out for during your upcoming work placement. My name is Natasha Munasinghe and I'm the CEO of a training and education organization called Frank. I was also formerly an international student. I was born in Sri Lanka and lived in the Fiji Islands before coming to Australia to study law. Now, a bit of a heads up as to Frank. We work with over 88,000 young people and students like yourself to really help you prepare for your future jobs and careers. Now, the purpose of this webinar is to help you understand your workplace laws and rights. And to do that, we have 3 parts to the webinar. In part 1, we talk about your work placement. In part 2, we look at what is classified as bullying in the workplace. And in part 3, we look at what is classified as discrimination in the workplace and what you can do if you experience any of these. Okay, let's go to part 1, your work placement. Now, as part of your studies, you'll be doing unpaid work placements with an Australian host organization. One of the main reasons for you undertaking this experience is to give you some sort of experience in an Australian organization and being able to work with Australian employees. You'll be able to build your confidence and also get to see how you can apply the skills you're learning in your degree and in the classroom, in the real world, in an actual company or organization. Something you should understand when undertaking work experience opportunities in Australia is that there are laws and regulations put in place to ensure you are safe and that your rights are looked after. The organization that looks after this area of employment law is called Fair Work Australia. Their job is to ensure that students like yourself and the host organization understand the rights and responsibilities under Australian law. They can also work with you and host organizations to resolve any issues that may come up. Their website is on screen. As an international student, know that you have the same rights as all workers in Australia. That is a very, very important point. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your work placement. So your work placement has been arranged by your university, and it's available for you to ensure that you are ready for the world of work when you graduate. Your placement will be unpaid. One of the most important things to remember is that when you enter the host organization for the first time, your expectations of it may not meet the reality. One of the reasons for this is that the people who you'll be working with, and maybe even your supervisor or manager, may be very busy with other tasks and their own workload. So sometimes it may feel like they don't have a lot of time for you, or they're not able to answer all your questions, or they may not be able to spend a lot of one-on-one time with you. And actually, this is all part of normal work life and the pace of normal work life. And it's really in your interest to get used to how this real world of work operates. Each host organization will also have a different way of working, so ensure that you go in with an open mind. Now, here are 3 tips I want to share with you to ensure that you have a positive first experience at the host organization. As soon as possible after you commence your placement, arrange a time with your supervisor or manager to discuss how your placement will work. You should discuss things like your placement hours, expectations of the job or the things that you'll be doing, your starting and break times, and also what to do if you're sick and maybe cannot get to work. By doing this as early as possible, you really set yourself up for success. If there are changes to any of these conditions as you start your placement, let's say for example, you need to change your placement hours, then communicate that to your supervisor as soon as possible. 2, be proactive and take ownership of the task given to you. Don't necessarily wait for people to give you a job to do. If you feel ready and confident, ask them what other tasks you may be able to support them with. Ensure, however, that whatever you do really well. Tip number 3, seek clarification before you do the tasks so that you know exactly what is expected of you beforehand. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Okay, let's skip to part 2 now. Bullying in the host organizations or in work. So it's important to know that you have a right not to be bullied or harassed at work. When I say bullying as defined by Fair Work is when you feel that a person or a group repeatedly acts unreasonably towards you or a group of people, and the behavior creates a risk to health and safety. So what does that actually mean? What are some examples of bullying? It could include teasing or practical jokes. It could include aggressive behavior like being sworn or yelled at, or worse, feeling pressured to behave inappropriately, being excluded from work-related events, and or having unreasonable work demands asked of you. These are all examples of bullying behavior. It's also important to understand what isn't bullying. Now, your manager or supervisor at your host organization has a right to make a decision about you based on your performance. They can also take disciplinary action towards you, and they may direct how the work is to be carried out by you. All these actions could be classified as reasonable, and reasonable actions do not count as bullying under the law. So let's say, for example, your supervisor questions you on poor performance or work that hasn't been done as they wanted it to be done. They also can have the right to question you if you do not comply with the organization's policies or rules, or if you show negative behavior, especially if that behavior impacts your co-workers. This is all part of actually normal work life. Final tip to remember is that each of us has different communication styles. It's not unusual in Australia for managers and your fellow co-workers to be quite direct and blunt with you if there's a problem they come across. Now, this style of communication may be very different to how we talk to managers or fellow workers or people senior to us in some of our home countries. So just be aware of this difference. Speaking in this way does not mean or may not mean necessarily that they're being rude. It could be just part of the normal communication style in the Australian business culture. Now, what do you actually do if you think you're being bullied? You should let your university coordinator and your supervisor or manager at your host organization know as soon as you feel you're being bullied or you're feeling uncomfortable about something. Really do not delay in letting these people know. More often than not, it may be a misunderstanding and maybe be able to be resolved to talking through with the people concerned. Okay, let's go over to part 3, the final part of the webinar, where we look at discrimination in the workplace. Now, what actually is discrimination in the workplace? Fair Work states that discrimination happens when an organization takes an adverse action against a worker or a person because of things like that person's race, color, gender, political opinion, religion, and a few other attributes. An adverse action includes things like being treated differently to other workers or changing someone's job description and so on. In New South Wales, Fair Work and the Anti-Discrimination Board of New South Wales are the sources of help and support. And on screen, I have put the 2 websites so that you know where to go to seek help and to seek more information. Now, that's what discrimination was. It's also important to know what isn't discrimination in the workplace. So sometimes, even though it might seem like an adverse action, it might not necessarily be so. There may be lawful reasons for it that have nothing to do with the person's characteristics. For example, it's not considered discrimination if the action the manager or the supervisor took is necessary for the requirements of the job or the task at hand, or if it's allowed under state or federal anti-discrimination law. Now, what do you do if you think you're being discriminated against? Just like for bullying, let your university coordinator know, as well as your supervisor or manager at your host organization, and do so immediately. Do not delay in letting these people know. So that brings us to the end of this webinar. As a quick recap, in part 1, we looked at your work placement. In part 2, we looked at what is classified as bullying in the workplace and what to do if you experience this. And in part 3, we looked at what is classified as discrimination in the workplace. Finally, as a little note to end this webinar, the Upskill project, which this webinar is a part of, is co-funded through the Study New South Wales Partner Projects Program and the University of Newcastle. Study New South Wales is a dedicated unit within the Department of Industry and is focused on making the experiences of international students better, safer, and more enjoyable when they live and study in New South Wales. Study New South Wales supports partner projects that align with its objectives and are jointly funded and delivered with organisations in the international education sector. For more information about Study New South Wales, there is the website on screen. Okay, well, thank you for listening to this webinar. You can connect with me and the Frank team on our Facebook and LinkedIn channels.